Aries is the launch point of the zodiac. Hello world, here I am. Aries, if you really want to think about it, is very much, Katniss Everdeen signing up for the Hunger Games, Luke Skywalker being chosen, um, Harry Potter getting the invitation, whatever that is. Aries is the sign of the one, the protagonist, the hero. Hello to my star children and sexual icons, symbols, legends, masters. We're really in the bread and butter of heavenly bodies today. I am delighted to be giving you some conversation about the age of Saturn in Aries upon which we are about to embark. So let me give you a little. If you have no idea what the fuck I'm talking about, I promise I'm going to make this as new user friendly as I can. And don't you love getting all this information from me rather than some bot website that your mother sent you? Am I speaking? Is that too personal? Okay. So you have been hearing a lot from me and from others that 2025 into 2026 is a very cataclysmic time. It's a big period of change, rebirth, new beginnings. And astrology is really affirming that and kind of telling us where things are going. We have this happened in 2025 and the deal's being sealed in 2026. A few Saturn and Neptune, two big planets, are entering the sign of Aries. For astrologers, that gives us a lot of information about where the culture is headed and why. So let me explain what this means. During the year, the sun moves through all 12 signs of the zodiac. It spends a month in each sign, and that's the season. So Aries season is in the spring. Aries, we think about the first sign of the zodiac. It's the hatching of the egg, Easter, Passover. We're really thinking about new beginnings, new life, things really being generated or initiated. Great. That's the sun. When you look at the orbit of the planets, there's 10 planetary archetypes in astrology. Some planets are closer to the sun, so they'll move through each of those signs at a pretty fast clip. So if you think about Mercury or Venus, that's like a month in each sign also. Jupiter, the planet Jupiter spends a year in each sign. Okay, so we can understand, well, if Jupiter's in that sign for a year, what will this year look like? Then the further out we go, after Jupiter, you get to Saturn. The planet Saturn spends around with some on and off breaks, 3 years in each sign. So instead of saying, okay, it's Aries season, these are kind of the themes for the month, when you're looking at a planet like Saturn that's spending 3 years in a sign, we're saying, okay, this archetype is going to be in this sign for a longer period, and it might be spelling out bigger themes for what's going on in our lives and for the world at large. So astrology is really good with this because astrology has different planets going in different orbits, which can give us these bigger chapters. Because the planet Saturn, whose themes I will explore momentarily, spends 3 years in each sign-ish, an orbit for Saturn to do all 12 signs, that is a 28 to 30 year period, which we love. Life is pretty much divided into 3 of these max. I mean, we're now heading into a period where we might be having people living to 120, but let's say that you live to 90. Saturn will do 3 revolutions, that means. And each of those is a pretty strong chapter to mark. Therefore, Saturn deals a lot with growing up, age, time, structure. When Saturn makes a full revolution when you're 28, it's known as your Saturn return. That's usually a big wake-up call or a big check-in because you're crossing out of extended childhood into adulthood. The second one will be in your 50s. The third one will be in your 80s. Saturn is known as like the iron planet. it represents boundaries. It represents limits. Like I said, time, age, structure. It's really trying to keep us or get us into the framework in which we are meant to operate. And it's meant to cut out the chaos, cut out the bullshit. I've said this on this podcast. Saturn is really like your recovery sponsor who needs to be kind of a hard ass on you to make sure that you're not like slipping up and going on a bender and getting into fights with cops after doing a line. Okay. So Saturn is not, it's not quite, when Saturn is moving through a sign, the themes are really about over these 2 to 3 years, what are we needing to deal with in ourselves? What is the big kind of project or application? And then for the world at large, what is the challenge or the battle or the struggle or the sharpening or the honing or the maturing that's needing to happen for the culture at large? Like I said, because Saturn takes about 28 years to make a revolution, every 7 years, Saturn's going to make an angle in your chart. That means it's going to make a 90-degree or a 180-degree or a 360-degree angle to where it was when you were born. Those are known as Saturn squares, Saturn oppositions, Saturn returns. If you would like more information about your Saturn return, your Saturn square, your Saturn opposition, all of these going down at ages 14, 21, 28, 36, 42, and on, you can buy my book, When Saturn Returns, Surviving Your Astrological Coming of Age by David Odyssey. I would love if you bought my book. Maybe then my editor would answer my goddamn emails, but that's a story for another day. So I'm bringing all of this up because Saturn, why are we talking about this now? In 2025, Saturn entered Aries. That was May 24th through August 31st, 2025, Saturn entered Aries. Saturn then did something called retrograding. It moved, or it appears to have gone backwards a bit, back into Pisces, where it's been since, 2022. On February 13th, 2026, the planet Saturn returns to Aries, where it will remain until April 12th, 2028. So that's a hot 2-year streak. We had kind of a few months. We had a summer preview in 2025. There's a lot to discuss here. So first of all, I'm going to talk about what does that mean that Saturn's in Aries? What does it mean that Saturn was in Pisces? What does that mean? Big picture, small picture. And I'm going to do my favorite thing, which is talk about what happened last time was Saturn was in Aries. Like, what was the kind of vibe? So we can maybe get a sense of where things are headed. And of course, we'll talk about how this applies for you personally. Saturn, like I said, takes 28 to 30 years to make a cycle of the zodiac, and Pisces is the final sign of the zodiac. So when Saturn is in Pisces, it's doing a big closure on the last 28 to 30 years. So Saturn was last in Aries, which means it started this streak of the 12 signs, April 1996 through February 1999. So that means that we are doing, when Saturn was in Pisces, the final sign of the zodiac, where it was from around 2022 to 2025 until right now, 2026, early 2026, Saturn is wrapping up 25, 20, 30 year cycle. You don't have to have been alive for that whole cycle. If you were born in 2005, doesn't matter. Saturn has arrived to Pisces. It has arrived to the end of the zodiac. Pisces is the sign of closure, maybe redemption, maybe healing, processing, synthesis, and some final release before the zodiac begins again and Saturn enters Aries. This really represents And I've said this in a few of the other episodes, but I just want to really mark how significant this is for all of us. If you've been dealing with your personal history, with where you came from, with the story, with, the way things have been, Saturn in Pisces is the face to face with the disease, the insobriety, the ancestral inheritance, the curse, the dark side, the shadow, the madness. Saturn in Pisces is bringing us to the very face to face with rock bottom to say, this is it. I really, really, really want to heal this. All right, I'll say this, and I could get in trouble for this. A lot of what has happened since since 2022, it has not been a smooth ride. We could say that in terms of ecological disasters, wars, and certain presidential elections. I have felt and observed that, and I felt this being really spoken to me. The fever is being brought out so that we can address the cause and create the antidote. That is not to say, and it's all been worth it and amazing. What that is saying is, at this point in the cycle, it all really needs to be exposed and revealed. And we have to lay it all out and see it so that we can then take on the active role in the next phase of the cycle. There's a million things I can say about Saturn and Pisces, but the most interesting thing is we had like 3 Frankenstein movies come out during this Saturn and Pisces, and Frankenstein, Mary Shelley herself wrote Frankenstein. It was published. Sorry. It was published when Saturn was in Pisces in, 18 something. Frankenstein is having this sort of, at the time of this recording, it just had this big release with Guillermo del Toro and Jacob Elordi. God love him. The idea of the person who is created out of different pieces of others, the idea of the creation facing its creator, these are all very Saturn and Pisces themes. It's so much about addressing where we come from, what made us, what's fucked up and inherently wrong with that, and can't ever be brought to purity or perfection, what our creator has done to us, and what a cruel world they've launched us into. Okay. Shablam. As Saturn closes out in Pisces, and by the way, the last time Saturn was in Pisces, we're really deep in mid-90s grunge. We're deep in the Saturn in Pisces. Kurt Cobain, who is a Pisces with Saturn in Pisces, ended his life during his Saturn return. Sinead O'Connor, during her first Saturn return in Pisces, gave us Universal Mother. We're really kind of in that mid-90s grunge. Saturn, as of February 13th, is entering Aries. Aries is the launch point of the zodiac. Hello world, here I am. Aries, if you really want to think about it, is very much, Katniss Everdeen signing up for the Hunger Games, Luke Skywalker being chosen, Harry Potter getting the invitation, whatever that is. Aries is the sign of the one, the protagonist, the hero. Aries is starting the zodiac. So Aries is so much about we are looking forward, we're going ahead. And this, like Aries is, of course, the god of war. What is the battle? What is the conflict? What is the kind of calling that is launching us out into the world? We can't be in the healing and the reckoning forever. Frankly, it gets tiresome. I mean, we've all had this with our therapist of like, are we really talking about this again? You know what I mean? The healing goes on forever, but at some point we also have to launch back. It's interesting, by the way. As soon as Saturn goes into Aries, we have Maggie Gyllenhaal's Bride of Frankenstein movie will be coming out with Christian Bale as Frankenstein and Jessie Buckley, who I am ambivalent about, as the Bride of Frankenstein. But again, there is that thing of like, okay, we had the Frankenstein sob story. Now we have the Bride of Frankenstein with the fucking crazy hair, and she's gonna like stir some shit up. Okay. So Aries is going to be more active. When Saturn enters Aries, first of all, it's a big cleaning of the slate. There is a sense that we're really starting over. The last 30-year cycle has been closed one way or the other. We did what we needed to do. We've reckoned with what we needed to reckon with. Now it's really time to like load the boat up and go to battle. We've kind of gotten our assignments. So I want to like really sit with that for a moment before I go any further and start getting galaxy brain. Everything you have had to do and deal with up to this moment was a release and a clearing so that we can start the journey anew. I can speak for myself, and I know a lot of other people who had to do a huge release during Saturn and Pisces. This is who I thought I was going to be. I have to give it up. This was the career I was cleaving to, the relationship I was cleaving to. One way or the other, I'm going to let it go. It might come back, it might not, but I'm really saying goodbye. Huge ego death. You know, as Saturn goes into Pisces, we now get to say like, all right, well, now what? And that now what is quite good. To me, Aries is saying, now what for the next 30 years? Where do we want to go? And by the way, if you know, this, when people who have their second Saturn return, incidentally, when, you know, a Saturn return happens for everyone at, you know, wherever Saturn was when you were born. So this is not really about if, you know, you may have been born with Saturn in Aquarius. You just had your Saturn return a few years ago. If you were born with Saturn in Taurus, you'll have your Saturn return in 2028, whatever. But when you're having that mid-50s Saturn return, it is like quite liberating to be like, all right, well, we're entering chapter 3. We can kind of do whatever we want now, because whatever those expectations were around, like, I have to be a father, a mother, a provider, I have to, whatever, we're now in a new arena. And the first Saturn return too is about like, all right, well, all of these things I said I wanted to do, how the fuck am I going to do that? But where we all are with Saturn and Aries, first of all, I do really want to say all the work you've done, all the dealing you had to do, all of the crying of the last few years was to bring us to this point of saying like, oh man, I feel so free now. You can throw me wherever, you know, you don't really, when you think about protagonists, you do kind of need them to be tabula rasa at the beginning. You don't really want Katniss Everdeen to be like, listen, I've got a lot of other stuff going on. I can't really do the Hunger Games right now. Maybe next year. Harry Potter wants to go to Hogwarts. He can't really be like, I have all these other relationships. I'm really involved. I'm in the middle of all these other projects. You know, the idea is with Saturn and Pisces, we've all been through such a personal harrowing that can kind of bring us back to zero, which then allows for the Saturn and Aries to say, we have your assignment for the next 30 years and it's going to be crazy. So I wanted to like really let us enjoy that, because I think there is like, you did good. You grieved when you needed to grieve. Now like the train is leaving the station. Shablam. Let me talk a little bit about what happened last time Saturn was in Aries, because I think that's going to give you an idea of the shape of the forms, incarnations, and challenges of this period. April 1996 to February 1999. We get Buffy, the Vampire Slayer, Destiny's Child. Really like This is still when we have the foursome. I think we have Farah and Savia during this, but it's the real, we're getting say my name. Mulan. We will also be getting Xena Warrior Princess is already airing, which is starring Aries Queen, Lucy Lawless. Buffy, played by Aries Queen, Sarah Jessica Parker. Alias, I think, might be a 1999 joint, Jennifer Garner. Charmed is led by Shannon Doherty, Aries, 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 Aries. So we have a big warrior woman archetype. The late 90s, there's a lot going on there in the culture, but late 90s was pretty fabulous for like women wearing patent leather and fucking putting wooden stakes into men's chests. That's really reductive. There's all sorts of forms that women can take, blah, blah, blah. But Mulan, I mean, I watch Mulan at least twice a year, and I can't even talk about that movie without crying. But let me just say, they didn't believe in her, but she believed in herself, and that is all that matters. Reese Witherspoon is an Aries. Reese Witherspoon, speaking of they didn't believe in her, but she believed in herself. Reese Witherspoon, this will be 2000, 2001, but Reese Witherspoon is giving us Legally Blonde. But during this period, she's giving us Election. Tracy Flick is like, yeah, we're really thinking about these epic protagonists. Mulan, Buffy Summers, Tracy Flick. I have to say, we get one of my favorite films, by the way, during Saturn. In Aries, we will be getting Scream 7 because we are about to experience, and trust me, we will do an episode on this, the Saturn return of Scream. In 1996, we get Scream. Scream also, we get Neve Campbell, who's just like, you know what, you guys want to fucking lay it on me? I'm going to have to fight. We're getting these women who have to fight and who are going to have to just take things into their own hands. So we're getting this new archetype of these sort of warrior women, Destiny's Child survivor. Shit's really getting hardcore in the world. I'm going to fight back. I'm going to take my role. I'm not going to be afraid. Great. So that is an archetype that's already pretty strong during Saturn and Aries. This is quite nice for a lot of reasons for Saturn and Aries 2025. Any story about a good protagonist or a heroine is going to need a really good villain. The Scream movies always have a great villain. Obviously, Buffy had an incredible rogues gallery. Mulan, that bitch is absolutely going to slam it. But any great movie, and again, we'll talk about this in the Neptune and Aries episode, but I have a lot of issues with Pixar movies from the last 15 years because it's like, where's the villain? And on Las Culturistas, Matt Rogers, I think, recently had an I Don't Think So, Honey, which was about like Disney movies that haven't had a villain getting a great comeuppance. But we are in a period that is not very ambiguous. The villains of the world have really chosen to declare themselves. I don't even need to, there's not much I need to say on that, but I think it used to be ironic, it used to be trolling, whatever, but those forces of authority or oligarchy in the world right now, they are not really being super shy. They are quite obvious and apparent. It doesn't really take a lot. So this is not a super subtle period. This is, again, Saturn in Pisces was so much about how have I abused myself? What was inherited? It's all very complicated. Okay. It's quite straightforward right now. Vampires and slayers, witches and demons, hunter hunted. Okay. In the late 90s, a lot of this came through in this sort of warrior woman archetype, and she will be emerging in this period again, certainly. I think we will also be getting a new trans warrior archetype during this era. We're really thinking about the people who are hunted, and we are thinking about in the culture and in the personal incarnation, what is the warrior that needs to emerge? That is not to say that we are all going to be like these badass women. I think that's really reductive. But I think that there are a lot of people who are literally, especially if we're thinking of women and trans people who are truly fighting for their lives, there is a more active personal activation. So I wanted to say, in the big picture culturally, but I also think really personally, we're starting to arm ourselves and it can be a little bit more literal. Saturn in Aries is wanting to say, what is your side? Not even what is your side. What is your role in the ultimate battle against good versus evil? Where are you? What is your part? Not everyone needs to be, and again, now we're entering, okay, let me say this. Because of social media, which I even hate saying that, we have all been turned into these sort of self-branding, narcissistic, protagonistic babies. And I don't mean to say that that's the point of everything. Like, in today's post, it's not quite that. It's saying, what is your calling for specifically you in all of this? And let's fucking like pack up the sword, chop your hair, get on the horse. The dark side of this, and this Saturn deals a lot with the dark side. Saturn is wanting to say, we want you to be the hero. We want you to take your role in the battle against ultimate evil, which, by the way, in 2026, it's really now or never. But these are the ways in which you enter toxic protagonism, which is to say, as you would say in recovery, toxic individualism of this is where this goes into a realm of either selfishness or martyrdom or victimhood. This is where this goes into, why isn't anyone appreciating or listening to me? Why are they all against me? Why aren't they doing things my way? I'll show them. They're not understanding me. Saturn is really wanting to say, like, oh, every hero is going to need to be shaped by their villain and by their mentor. You need the Woody Harrelson or the Obi-Wan or the Yoda. In Kill Bill, you need Pai Mei. Whatever that is, you need those forces around you that are going to really get you in fighting shape and get you out of yourself. So it's a really tricky assignment, but in other ways, it's quite simple. You are getting your marching orders for the next 30 years. You're getting your calling. You're really starting at the beginning. To do that, you have to be very, very humble. To do that, it's about you and it's also not about you. So Saturn in Aries, I think there's going to be a lot of that, which is like, to unleash that inner warrior, there has to be like a deep level of humiliation. I think a lot of us during Saturn in Pisces were deeply I can speak for myself. The humiliation I endured specifically in the last 3 years, it'll stick around, okay? But there is a sense of all of the ways that you have been putting yourself in the world and seeing yourself as heroic have probably been bullshit. We're going to crush those in a very hard way so that we can get you in line with the real heroic service that you have to offer the world. I mentioned martyrdom before, which Saturn and Pisces is so much about. Like, I think so many of us in our families may play the role of the martyr, and we may observe ourselves doing that thing of self-sacrificing dramatically. And sometimes it's like, that's not the fight. You need to be the catalyst or the confrontational one who is not suffering so everyone can be okay, but who is forcing the conversation or changing the conversation or choosing what the conversation is that they engage in and what they need to step away from. But Saturn in Aries is really making you be honest about that. It's a lot easier, I think, to suffer and and I can speak for myself, to be the victim or the martyr who's, crying the tears of the last 3,000 years. I think having to say, all right, I am playing a role. Yikes. Is this the role I've assigned? I'm still playing this role. I've been playing this role this whole time. We got to change this. Saturn deals so much with age. Our age, the age of our parents, those dynamics have to change. And Saturn in Aries is saying, this is a new beginning. Change. You got to start new. We can't keep doing the shit we've been doing. Let me talk about some other cultural aspects of the late 90s so that we can, catch you up. Something I really liked about the late 90s, talking about Scream or Buffy, the late 90s gave us a really epic era of Saturday Night Live, which was the Molly Shannon, Sherry O'Terry, Anna Gasteyer period. Those women, we also had Mad TV on at this time. And of course, we had the Wayans brothers kind of at their peak with, I don't know, it's hard to say when the Wayans brothers' peak was, but we got Scary Movie, which, we had the comedic genius of Anna Faris and Regina Hall. This was a very visceral form of comedy. We also got Kirsten Dunst giving us Drop Dead Gorgeous, leading up to Bring It On, Dick. This is women doing a very visceral, physical, bodily comedy. Molly Shannon is literally throwing herself into stools as Mary Catherine Gallagher. Sherry O'Terry in Scary Movie. You're on my foot, fat shit. I want to say something right now. Regina Hall, retroactive Oscar nomination for Scary Movie. The movie theater scene in Scary Movie, I showed that to my now ex-boyfriend. I could not stand. I was laughing so hard. He didn't get it. Anyways, he's dead to me now. Okay. But these women gave us viscera. And and even Scream. Oh, fuck. Neve Campbell and Courtney Cox are just like, there is blood splattering on this women, and they're just like, we're going to roll with it. I bring all that up because there is an immediacy to Aries that I really like. And I'm really hoping that the culture is going there in one regard. Why I say that is because the culture has been in a very nostalgic, we'll talk about this a lot with Neptune going into Aries, but I think the nostalgic, everything's a reference, Met Gala, Drag Race, everything's a callback, everything is kind of a commentary on a commentary. It's nice when Aries, which is so much about the body, we are really in the body and in that sort of immediacy. I really like that viscera, that gore, that sort of like blood, guts, humors aspect. And I think it's good for comedy. I think it's good for creativity because it's just less of the fucking postmodernist people standing and talking. It's more, I saw this and it made me piss my pants. That I also think has a really personal application because I think as we've been talking about gender and about all of these things for good or for bad, it's been so, and I don't, I know how I'm about to sound, there's been an academic aspect. And I think when Saturn's in Aries, we're really in it. We're really like in the body and all of the gooiness of that. Obviously where that's intense is that Saturn in Aries, this is not a peaceful period. Okay. We're not in a time of Zen, chilling, talking about our feelings. It's really, it's a martial time in the world. I don't think that's going to be going away, unfortunately. And it's a martial time in terms of human relations and in terms of like the poison we unleash on each other. I think the big big work of Saturn and Aries on a personal collective level, even if you are, and I, by the way, anyone who's been in the nonprofit world can tell you this, those can be the most poisonous spaces of all. However good our intentions are, it's very difficult to know our limits. It's very difficult when you're at the protest to understand, am I helping? Am I being a warrior for the people right now? Or am I playing out my mommy issues from 1996? I can speak for myself. That is a big, that is not to say, again, that you shouldn't be fighting the good fight and that you should just be in therapy for the rest of your life. And only once you've healed can you take your place. No. In the messiness, in the battle, in the conflict, in the fight, it's very, very difficult to hold ourselves back. You know, for Luke Skywalker, when he's facing off against Darth Vader in Return of the Jedi, he has to pull himself back before crossing over to the dark side and becoming the villain. Katniss Everdeen is offered at the end of the Hunger Games. They say, well, why don't we restart the Hunger Games? And she has to be the one who says, I'm walking away from this. It's the hardest part of this, because if we've gone to victim to hero to protagonist, we want so badly to be right. And it's so hard when these conflicts are complicated. Obviously, like I said, we have quite a few supervillains out there, which is fabulous, because it's like, go after them. Go after the ones in power. But, you know, a lot of these conflicts are really personal. They're really loaded. And having to figure out, I want to fight the good fight. I want to be of service. I don't want to drag my shit into this. And I don't want to get subsumed by my desire to win or to teach them a lesson or whatever. That'll be the big thing. It will be a very interesting, I have to say this, you know, the late 90s edition was a big period for warrior women. It was a dark period for male juvenilization. You know, this was really the peak of internet porn. We really saw the lead up to Woodstock 99. You should watch that documentary. We were leading towards a big backlash. You know, the election of George Bush in 2000, the posts, you know, you should read. If you haven't read Susan Faludi's Terror Dream, get up in there. It's so underrated. But we really got a big backlash with the millennium. I lived it. It was not a great period for gender, because it really was about women being returned to their roles and men being seen as these sort of like horny, incapable barbarians. And we're kind of back there in terms of male infantilization and juvenilia. I think for we queers with Saturn and Aries, as we're getting these warrior archetypes, as we're maybe seeing on the straight side of things, and when I say straight, I really mean like the people who are in the mainstream, who are returning to these sort of, and again, we're seeing this with a lot of the anti-trans legislation is already trying to redefine what a man and a woman are and how a man and a woman should dress. So we're getting a lot of these sort of regressive, patronizing, juvenile ideas that don't allow for people to embody the best of or the highest incarnation of divine masculine and divine feminine. That's going to be on the other side. I think Saturn and Aries, for those of us who want to go on the gender journey, go on the exploration of our gender and sexuality and bring it to its highest self and fight for it, I think it's a really fun time to bring out that warrior archetype and to bring out, Aries is ruled by Mars, to bring out that Mars and to explore what are what's held your inner warrior back. And it's going to be, you know, a battle. I think where the healing will need to happen from on all sides is those who are in the phase of maybe masculine juvenilia, you know, those boys who are not able to be men, how can we help them? I know that sounds crazy, but that is, and not to do that very boring, we need to reach across the aisle, but can we get some of them to be fighting the good fight and maybe taking on that divine masculine role? And who in our life can we really be doing that healing with, in ourselves and with others? I would really be thinking about new beginnings. What do you want the next 30 years to look like? What's held you back? What is the bullshit that has held us back? What have we healed? What are we ready to jump into? What are we afraid of? It's very heroic in that regard. Obviously, this is going to be a big turning point for Gen Z and for Gen X, because a lot of Gen Z are entering what millennials just went through for the last 7 years, which is you're entering your Saturn return, you're becoming old and lame. So if you're born with Saturn in Aries, you are entering your Saturn return. Many people who were born during the late 60s are going to be entering their second Saturn return. So this is a big turning point. You're girl, you'll be a woman soon. For that, I would get a reading or check out my book When Saturn Returns. But generally speaking, there is a maturing that's going to be happening. We're all kind of wondering, Gen Alpha's rising and Gen Z is really maturing. What does that look like? So it's a really beautiful period of depersonalization, of coming out of the algorithm and coming out of the sort of hyper branding. This is me. This is who I am. This is how I define myself on a Grindr profile, and saying, no, actually, this is who I could be and what's out there for me. I know that's a lot, but this is exciting. Let's go. I'm excited. I'm really ready to change my story and change this whole narrative about myself, and not even be in narratives anymore. Narrative, inheritance, all of that. So I hope you can go with me. We will be back next week. We are only at the dawn of this Aries era, and we have plenty more to discuss. We'll be back next week, so please join us. I hope you're a subscriber. Obviously, send this podcast to the warrior women, girls, gays, and theys in your life who are feeling it. Not just the Aries in your life, but all sorts of chic, hot warrior people. Please share this with your people. Please leave a glowing encomium wherever you listen to your podcasts. Rate, review. It really, really helps. And I really want this podcast to have a smoking hot crowd. If you have any questions or comments, I want to hear. So hit us up at ask@heavenlybodiespodcast.com. And you can find me at davidodyssey.com. Book a reading. And listen, I love seeing you. I love you seeing me. And I will see you next week. Thank you. Mwah. Thank you for listening. This podcast is part of Pride House Media, hosted by David Odyssey and produced by Matthew Breen and Josh Rosenzweig, with original music composed by Nell Balaban. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And while you're there, leave us a rating and review. It really helps others discover the show. I'd love to get to know you, so email questions and visions to ask@heavenlybodiespodcast.com and book a reading with me at davidodyssey.com. Until our next trip, keep looking up.